Last year, a retired schoolteacher in Central Florida received a knock on her front door. Two USDA inspectors, clipboards in hand, badges visible. They weren't there about taxes. They weren't there about permits. They were there about a tree. A tree she'd planted 15 years ago. A tree she bought legally at a local garden center that no longer sells them. Within 48 hours, that tree was gone. Every plant within 20 feet of it, gone. The fine? $4,000. Her crime? Growing a tree she had no idea was illegal. Right now, across America, there are 12 plants so dangerous, so invasive, or so toxic that federal and state authorities can legally enter your property and destroy them. Some produce sap that causes third-degree chemical burns when sunlight hits your skin. Some were planted by the United States government itself before they realized their catastrophic mistake. One contains a toxin so potent there is no antidote in any American hospital. And some of these look like ordinary garden plants. You might have one growing next to your front door right now and have absolutely no idea you're breaking the law. Before we reveal the full list, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss updates that could save you thousands in fines and protect everything you've worked to grow in your garden. In the next 30 minutes, you'll discover which plants are outlawed by federal law, which states prosecute everyday gardeners, and the shocking reasons behind every single prohibition. If you've ever planted something without checking your state's restricted species list, you need to hear this. Let's start with a plant the government once handed out for free. They paid American farmers to put it in the ground. Now they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to destroy every last vine. Picture this, a lush green vine draped over everything in sight. Trees, barns, telephone poles, abandoned houses, entire hillsides covered in a thick blanket of leaves. From a distance it almost looks peaceful, like nature decided to tuck the landscape into bed. That vine is kudzu, and it's eating the American South alive. Back in the 1930s and 40s, the United States government actively promoted kudzu for erosion control. The Soil Conservation Service encouraged farmers to plant it. They didn't just suggest it. They paid farmers $8 an acre to do it. Kudzu was marketed as a miracle vine that would save degraded farmland across the Southeast. They were catastrophically wrong. Kudzu grows up to 1 foot per day during summer. 1 foot, every single day. It climbs over mature trees, smothers them completely, blocks every ray of sunlight, and kills them within a few growing seasons. The vine doesn't stop at trees. It swallows fences, cars, sheds, entire abandoned houses. If it can reach it, kudzu will consume it. Today, kudzu infests over 7 million acres across the southeastern United States. Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, the Carolinas, even pushing into southern Illinois and Indiana. The estimated annual cost of kudzu damage and control efforts exceeds $500 million. Property owners in banned states face mandatory removal orders. If you don't remove it, the county will, and they will send you the bill. Imagine buying your dream farmhouse in rural Georgia. 5 beautiful acres, rolling hills, mature oak trees, a creek in the back. Then you notice it. A green wall creeping toward your property line, growing a foot closer to your house every single day. By next summer, your oak trees are suffocating under a blanket of vine. By the summer after that, your back porch is buried. That's the kudzu reality, and millions of Americans in the South are living it right now. Kudzu smothers everything above ground, but our next illegal plant attacks from an entirely different angle. It doesn't need to touch your trees or your crops. It poisons you directly, through your skin, and it uses sunlight as its weapon. Imagine a plant that looks like it belongs in a fairy tale, 14 to 20 feet tall, massive umbrella-shaped clusters of white flowers on top of thick, ridged green stems. It's striking. It's dramatic. It looks like something a Victorian botanist would cross an ocean to collect. And that's exactly what happened. Giant hogweed was brought to North America as an ornamental garden showpiece in the early 20th century. Botanical gardens prized it. Wealthy estate owners planted it as a conversation piece. It was exotic, it was impressive, and it was a terrible, terrible mistake. Giant hogweed produces a sap containing chemicals called furanocoumarins. On their own, they're relatively harmless. But the moment that sap contacts your skin and sunlight hits it, the reaction begins. It's called phytophotodermatitis. Your skin loses all ability to protect itself from ultraviolet light. What follows are severe chemical burns, not mild irritation, actual third-degree burns, massive blisters, permanent scarring that can last a lifetime. And if the sap reaches your eyes, temporary or permanent blindness. But here's the part that haunts medical professionals. Those burns can reactivate. Months after the initial exposure, sometimes years later, sunlight hitting the same skin can trigger the blistering all over again. The chemicals alter your skin cells at a fundamental level. You don't get a single injury, you get a recurring nightmare activated every time you step into the sun. Giant hogweed is federally listed as a noxious weed. States including New York, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Virginia, Washington, and Oregon have aggressive eradication programs. In some states, if you find giant hogweed on your property, you are legally required to report it to agricultural authorities. You are explicitly told not to attempt removal yourself. Trained crews in full protective equipment handle it. And here's the terrifying detail that catches gardeners off guard. Giant hogweed looks almost identical to wild carrot and Queen Anne's lace. The plants grow in similar areas. The flowers are a similar shape and color. Many gardeners can't tell the difference until they're standing in an emergency room trying to explain why their arm looks like it was held over a blowtorch. A child playing near a creek brushes against the stem on a sunny afternoon. Within 48 hours, their forearm is covered in blisters that look like severe thermal burns. And the burns keep coming back, every summer, every time that skin sees sunlight. For years. Giant hogweed burns your skin on contact. But our next illegal plant has been weaponized by nature in a completely different way. It doesn't just compete with other plants. It breeds the ticks that are giving your family Lyme disease. Small, neat shrub, bright red berries, tiny thorns, looks like a perfectly normal ornamental hedge, the kind you'd see lining a suburban driveway from Massachusetts to Pennsylvania. Landscapers loved it for decades. Homeowners planted it by the millions because it was low maintenance, deer-resistant, and looked great in every season. Then researchers discovered something nobody expected. Japanese barberry changes the soil chemistry beneath it. It raises pH levels and alters nitrogen content so dramatically that native plants simply cannot survive in the same ground. Where Japanese barberry grows, everything else dies. But that's not why states started banning it. The University of Connecticut published research that sent shockwaves through the gardening world. Areas infested with Japanese barberry harbor 67% more black-legged ticks compared to areas with native plants, 67%. The dense, thorny branches and moist leaf litter beneath barberry create the perfect humid microhabitat where ticks thrive, breed, and wait for hosts. And black-legged ticks carry Lyme disease. Your neighbor's pretty hedge isn't just killing native wildflowers, it's breeding the ticks that transmit a debilitating disease to your family and your pets. New York, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and parts of Maine and Connecticut have now banned the sale and planting of Japanese barberry. Some states offer buyback programs, literally paying homeowners to rip out their barberry hedges and replace them with native alternatives. That's how desperate they are to get this plant out of American landscapes. And if you're thinking, well, I don't live in those states, consider this. The tick problem doesn't respect state lines. Japanese barberry is sold in garden centers across the country, and everywhere it's planted, tick populations surge. Japanese barberry secretly breeds disease-carrying ticks. But our next plant carries a disease itself, one that threatens a multi-billion-dollar American industry that employs hundreds of thousands of people. Beautiful small tree with glossy dark green leaves and fragrant white flowers that smell absolutely incredible. It's the kind of plant that makes you stop on a sidewalk in South Florida and breathe deeply. Nurseries sold it for years as a patio tree and ornamental landscaping staple across the Sun Belt. Nobody warned anyone about what it was hiding. Orange jasmine is the primary alternate host for the Asian citrus psyllid, a tiny insect that carries one of the most devastating agricultural diseases on the planet, citrus greening, also known as huanglongbing or HLB. Once a citrus tree is infected with HLB, there is no cure. None. The tree slowly dies over several years. Fruit becomes small, bitter, lopsided, and completely unmarketable. The tree becomes a factory for producing more infected psyllids that spread to every citrus tree within flying distance. Florida alone produces the vast majority of America's orange juice. The state's citrus industry was once worth over $9 billion annually. Since citrus greening arrived, Florida's orange production has plummeted by more than 70%. Entire communities that depended on citrus farming have been devastated. Family groves that operated for generations, gone, and orange jasmine is one of the plants keeping the cycle alive. The USDA has established quarantine zones across Florida, Texas, California, Arizona, Louisiana, and Georgia. Within these zones, orange jasmine and related species are strictly prohibited. Moving plants across state lines carries severe federal penalties. Inspectors actively search for and destroy these plants. One backyard orange jasmine in suburban Miami can host the insect that infects every commercial orange grove within miles. An entire region's economy, thousands of jobs, farms going back generations, compromised because of a pretty landscaping tree somebody planted next to their pool. That plant silently destroys an industry worth billions. Our next plant destroys something you can't put a dollar figure on: the water supply for millions of Americans living in the driest states in the country. Before we continue with the next illegal plants, if you're finding this information valuable and you want to protect your garden from legal trouble, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I share gardening updates every week that keep you ahead of costly mistakes and legal headaches. One notification could save you thousands. Feathery, delicate-looking tree with soft pink flowers. It looks gentle, ornamental, almost fragile. Salt cedar, also called tamarisk, was introduced to the American West in the 1800s for erosion control along riverbanks. It seemed like a perfect fit for the arid landscape. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. A single mature salt cedar can consume over 200 gallons of water per day. In Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and parts of Texas and California, where water rights trigger lawsuits and generational feuds, that kind of consumption is an act of theft. Salt cedar has taken over hundreds of miles of riverbanks across the Colorado River Basin. Streams that once supported ranches, farms, and entire communities are drying up because salt cedar is drinking them empty. But it doesn't stop at water theft. Salt cedar deposits salt in the surrounding soil as it transpires, literally salting the earth. Native willows, cottonwoods, and grasses that evolved along western waterways for thousands of years cannot survive in salt-contaminated soil. They die, and salt cedar moves into the void. In states where every gallon matters, where farmers fight in court over fractions of a water share, one salt cedar is quietly drinking 200 gallons of their future every single day. Ranchers across the West watch helplessly as their water sources vanish into thickets of this invasive tree. Federal and state eradication programs are active across the Southwest. If authorities find salt cedar on your property in Colorado or Utah, they will order its removal. If you don't comply, they remove it themselves and the bill arrives in your mailbox. Salt cedar steals water and poisons the soil with salt. But our next plant doesn't need to be subtle. It poisons the ground with chemicals, produces hundreds of thousands of seeds every year, and it's the preferred landing pad for an invasive insect army that's devastating American vineyards and orchards. You've seen this tree. Guaranteed. It's the one growing through cracks in abandoned parking lots, out of crumbling brick walls, along highway medians, in vacant lots in every major American city. Tree of Heaven grows where nothing else can. It thrives on neglect, and it is one of the most aggressively invasive species on the continent. Originally imported from China in the 1700s as an ornamental shade tree, Tree of Heaven produces up to 325,000 seeds per year, each one capable of sprouting in conditions that would kill almost any other plant. Concrete, gravel, rooftops, sewer grates, it doesn't matter. But the seeds are only half the problem. Tree of Heaven practices allelopathy, releasing toxic chemicals from its roots and bark that actively poison the soil for competing plants. Nothing native can grow near it. The tree creates its own dead zone and expands into it, year after year. And now, the real crisis. Tree of Heaven is the preferred host of the spotted lanternfly, an invasive insect from Asia that has exploded across the eastern United States. Spotted lanternflies feed on Tree of Heaven, then spread to vineyards, orchards, and hardwood forests. They've caused hundreds of millions of dollars in agricultural damage across Pennsylvania, Virginia, New Jersey, New York, and beyond. That weedy tree growing through the crack in your driveway isn't just an eyesore. It's a landing pad and breeding ground for an invasive insect that's devastating wine country and fruit orchards from Pennsylvania to Virginia. Pennsylvania, Virginia, Connecticut, and Ohio now classify Tree of Heaven as a noxious weed. Active eradication programs are tied directly to spotted lanternfly control efforts. Removal is not optional, it's a matter of agricultural survival. Tree of Heaven feeds an invasive pest army. But our next plant doesn't need any allies at all. It conquers ecosystems completely alone, and it does it underwater. Gorgeous purple flowers floating on still water. Thick, glossy green leaves. It looks like something Claude Monet would have painted. It looks like the kind of plant you'd proudly add to your backyard pond to impress the neighbors. Water hyacinth is one of the most destructive organisms on the planet. This plant doubles its coverage every 6 to 14 days. Think about that. 1 plant in your pond this week, 2 next week, 4 the week after. Within a few months, the entire surface is sealed shut under a dense, interlocking mat of vegetation so thick it blocks 100% of sunlight from reaching the water below. Fish die. Native aquatic plants die. Oxygen levels collapse. Entire lake ecosystems suffocate under a blanket of beautiful purple flowers. But the damage extends far beyond ecology. Water hyacinth clogs waterways, dams, irrigation canals, and water treatment intake pipes. Boats can't navigate infested waters. Flooding worsens because drainage channels are blocked. Water hyacinth is federally prohibited under the Lacey Act. It's banned in most southern and western states. Texas, Louisiana, Florida, California, and Arizona all run active eradication programs that cost taxpayers millions annually. 1 water hyacinth in your backyard pond escapes into the local creek after a heavy rain. A few fragments float downstream. Within months, the reservoir that supplies drinking water for your entire town is choked. No boating, no fishing, no clean water intake. And the eradication bill runs into the hundreds of thousands. Water hyacinth suffocates lakes in weeks. But our next plant suffocates entire wetlands over years, and the government is so terrified of it, they've made even possessing its seeds a crime in some states. Stunning tall spikes of vibrant purple flowers. Fields of them look absolutely breathtaking. The kind of scene people pull over on country roads to photograph. The kind of plant that makes you think nature is showing off. Nature is showing off, all right. Showing off how efficiently it can destroy an entire ecosystem. A single purple leucostrife plant produces up to 2.7 million seeds per year. 2.7 million. Those seeds spread by water, by wind, by clinging to the fur of animals and the boots of hikers. Once purple leucostrife enters a wetland, it takes over completely. Native cattails, sedges, rushes, and grasses are crowded out and replaced by a dense monoculture of loosestrife. Wetland wildlife collapses. Ducks, herons, and shorebirds lose nesting habitat. Frogs and turtles lose breeding grounds. The insects that native birds depend on can't feed on loosestrife. The entire food chain unravels from the bottom up. Purple loosestrife is banned in over 30 states. It's a federal noxious weed. Some states have made it a crime to possess even the seeds. The destruction is so severe that biological control agents, specifically European beetles that feed on loosestrife, have been released across the country in a desperate attempt to slow the invasion. That beautiful purple marsh you drove past last summer? It used to be a thriving wetland full of waterfowl, frogs, and native wildflowers. Now it's a purple desert. Nothing lives there except loosestrife, standing in silence where birdsong used to fill the air. Purple loosestrife devastates wetlands with millions of seeds. But our next plant doesn't need seeds at all. It regenerates from fragments smaller than your fingernail. And once it takes hold, there is almost nothing that can stop it. Before we get to the final 4 plants on our list, and trust me, they get significantly more dangerous from here, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Next week, I'm revealing the plants that are shockingly legal despite their dangerous reputations. Some of them are probably in your kitchen right now. You don't want to miss that one. A tiny floating fern with fuzzy, water-repellent leaves. It looks almost cute, harmless, like something you'd find in a pet store aquarium section. You could hold a dozen of them in the palm of your hand. Giant salvinia is one of the most terrifying aquatic invasive species on Earth. This plant reproduces by fragmentation. A piece smaller than your fingernail, a fragment so small you wouldn't notice it clinging to a boat hull, can regenerate into a full colony. It doubles its biomass in as little as 2 to 4 days under favorable conditions. Within weeks, it can cover an entire lake surface. The mats grow so thick and dense that people have accidentally walked onto them, thinking it was solid ground, and fallen through into the water below. All sunlight is blocked. All aquatic life below the mat suffocates and dies. Fish populations collapse. Native aquatic plants vanish. The lake becomes a dead zone covered in a carpet of fern. Giant salvinia is a federal noxious weed banned across Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. Millions of dollars are spent annually on eradication, but controlling a plant that regenerates from microscopic fragments is a nearly impossible task. A fisherman rinses his boat trailer at a Texas lake on Saturday. A fragment smaller than a dime clings to the hull. He doesn't see it. Nobody would. He drives 200 miles to another lake on Sunday. He backs his boat in. Within a year, that second lake is dead. Covered surface to surface in giant salvinia. Fish gone. Recreation gone. Property values along the shoreline gone. Giant salvinia kills entire lakes from a fragment you can't even see, but our next plant can kill you. And it does it through a mechanism so ancient and so efficient there is no antidote in any American hospital. Delicate white flowers arranged in umbrella-shaped clusters. Ferny, lacy leaves, a tall, elegant plant with distinctive purple blotches on its smooth green stems. It grows along roadsides, in ditches, beside creek beds, in empty lots, along fence lines, and increasingly in suburban parks and schoolyards. Poison hemlock looks almost identical to wild carrot, to Queen Anne's lace, to plants that people casually pick for kitchen table flower arrangements without a second thought. Every single part of poison hemlock is lethal. Roots, stems, leaves, flowers, seeds, all of it. The plant contains coniine and piperidine alkaloids, the same class of toxins that killed Socrates. The poison causes ascending paralysis. Your legs go numb first, then your arms. Then the paralysis reaches your diaphragm. Your lungs stop working. You suffocate. And you are fully conscious the entire time you're dying. There is no antidote. None. Emergency rooms can provide supportive care, ventilation to keep you breathing, but there is no drug that reverses the poisoning. If you ingest enough, and the lethal dose is shockingly small, the outcome depends entirely on how quickly you reach a hospital with a ventilator. Children are especially vulnerable because poison hemlock grows in exactly the places children play. Parks, creek sides, empty lots, school perimeters. Pets are vulnerable because they graze near roadsides where hemlock flourishes. Livestock deaths from hemlock poisoning are documented every year across the Midwest and Pacific Northwest. Ohio, Washington, Michigan, and Indiana classify poison hemlock as a noxious weed. States mandate removal from public rights-of-way and school properties. But the plant spreads aggressively, and every spring it appears in more places than the year before. It looks exactly like the wild carrot your grandmother used to pick for flower arrangements. One wrong identification, one child pulling hollow stems near a playground to use as a pretend telescope. And you're racing to an emergency room that has no antidote. Poison hemlock paralyzes you from the legs up while you watch it happen. But our next plant causes suffering in a completely different and almost unbelievable way. It produces pain so intense, so relentless, and so long-lasting that victims have described it as the worst experience of their lives. Heart-shaped leaves covered in tiny, nearly invisible hairs. It looks like a harmless tropical houseplant, the kind of thing you'd see in a greenhouse and think about adding to your collection of exotic specimens. Gympie gympie, also known as the suicide plant, is native to Australia. It has no business being in the United States. But exotic plant collectors have repeatedly attempted to import seeds and specimens, and USDA and APHIS inspectors have intercepted shipments at ports and customs facilities. Here's why authorities are so vigilant about keeping it out. The leaves and stems are covered in microscopic silica-tipped hairs. They're so fine you can barely see them, but the moment they penetrate your skin, they deliver a neurotoxin that triggers pain described by researchers and victims as being simultaneously burned with hot acid and electrocuted. The pain doesn't fade in hours. It doesn't fade in days. It lasts for weeks, often months. In documented cases, years, and the mechanism is almost diabolically clever. The silica hairs embed themselves in your skin and cannot be fully removed. They're too small for tweezers. They're too numerous to extract individually. And every time you take a hot shower, every time you touch the affected area, every time the skin is stressed, the hairs release more toxin. The pain reactivates. Months after the initial contact, a hot shower can bring back the full intensity of the original sting. The toxin doesn't break down over time. Dried museum specimens of Gympie gympie have stung researchers decades after they were collected and preserved. The plant remains dangerous essentially forever. There is no approved treatment that reliably stops the pain. Medical professionals can offer pain management, but not a cure. The neurotoxin interacts with nerve cells in ways that are still not completely understood. Seeds and plants are confiscated at U.S. Customs. There is no legal commercial sale, but the exotic plant collecting community is persistent, and authorities remain vigilant because even one established Gympie gympie plant in the wrong place could cause severe harm. Imagine brushing against a leaf in your greenhouse. The pain hits like fire within seconds. Weeks later, it's still burning. Months later, a hot shower makes you gasp because the agony floods back like it just happened. The microscopic hairs are embedded in your skin, and there is almost nothing medicine can do except wait and manage the pain. Gympie gympie causes pain that can last years from a single touch. But our final forbidden plant brings us full circle, back to a plant so common, so ordinary-looking, and so beautiful in autumn that the person from our opening story had absolutely no idea it was illegal, and it cost her everything. Beautiful, heart-shaped leaves that turn brilliant shades of red, orange, and purple in fall. Clusters of small white waxy berries that look like popcorn hanging from the branches. Fast-growing, shade-providing, stunning in every season. Chinese tallow looks like the perfect backyard tree. It's one of the most aggressive invasive trees in the American South. Originally introduced from Asia for seed oil production and ornamental use, Chinese tallow escaped cultivation decades ago and has been conquering the southern landscape ever since. A single mature tree produces up to 100,000 seeds per year. The waxy seeds float on water, spreading along creeks, rivers, and drainage ditches for miles. Birds eat the berries and deposit seeds across entire counties. Chinese tallow invades coastal prairies, bottomland forests, marshlands, and suburban neighborhoods with equal aggression. It displaces the native trees that wildlife depends on for food and shelter. It changes soil chemistry, making the ground hostile to native species. And it's resilient enough to survive the controlled burns that land managers use to maintain healthy ecosystems. While native plants burn and regenerate as nature intended, Chinese tallow survives the fire and fills the void they leave behind. Florida, Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi have banned Chinese tallow. It's classified as a federal noxious weed in multiple states. Active eradication programs are underway, but controlling a tree that produces 100,000 seeds annually and spreads by both water and birds is an enormous, expensive, and seemingly endless battle. Remember that retired school teacher in Central Florida at the beginning of this video? The tree she was fined $4,000 for? It was a Chinese tallow. She'd planted it 15 years earlier, bought it legally at a garden center that no longer carries them. At some point after she planted it, the laws changed. The species was added to the prohibited list. Nobody knocked on her door to tell her. No letter arrived in the mail. Nobody warned her. And when USDA inspectors found it during a routine neighborhood survey for invasive species, they didn't just fine her, they removed the tree. They removed every plant within 20 feet of it to ensure no seeds had established new growth. She lost her tree. She lost a section of her garden. She lost $4,000. And she'd done nothing wrong except not know that the rules had changed. She had no idea it was illegal. And that's the entire point. From plants that burn your skin for years to vines that swallow entire houses. From water thieves draining western rivers to silent disease carriers threatening billion-dollar industries. From neurotoxins with no antidote to tiny ferns that regenerate from invisible fragments and kill entire lakes. These 12 plants remind us that gardening isn't just about what grows well. It's about what should grow, what's legal to grow, and what protects our health, our agriculture, our water, and our native ecosystems. Some of these prohibitions protect us from direct physical harm, like giant hogweeds recurring chemical burns and poison hemlocks conscious paralysis. Others protect industries that employ hundreds of thousands of Americans and generate billions in economic activity: citrus, wine, timber, wheat, all under threat from plants that most people would call beautiful. And still others protect the native ecosystems that took thousands of years to develop, ecosystems being erased in a single decade by invaders that produce millions of seeds, consume hundreds of gallons of water, and poison the very soil they grow in. Drop your state in the comments below and tell me, have you ever had authorities come to your property about an invasive plant? Have you seen any of these 12 growing wild near you? Have you seen government eradication crews working in your area? I read every single comment, and I am genuinely curious about the regional differences in enforcement across this country. If you want to see which plants are shockingly legal despite being incredibly dangerous, some of them are probably sitting in your kitchen right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications. That video is coming next week. And remember that school teacher from Florida. She didn't know. She bought the tree legally. She planted it with her own hands. She loved it for 15 years. And one afternoon, 2 inspectors knocked on her door and took it all away. Knowledge is your protection. Garden smart, garden legal. Stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.